Grand. So who's been here for all 4 days? Oh, wow, that's actually quite a lot of us. So how many of you guys are actually indie developers and have done some showcasing stuff here? Okay, okay. How many people here are interested into getting into games as an actual career? Oh, like a ton of you. Fantastic. That's what this talk is actually about. Oh, crap, I actually sat on the clicker. Oh, shit. There we go. All right, okay, so what is success, right? Success is being able to pay your bills and sustain an actual career in game dev. This is possible, and you don't actually have to go into a studio to do it. I think it's probably worthwhile going through a couple of examples of actually how AAA devs and some of the more traditional studio types actually get their jobs. I mean, the first example is to go to university, get a degree, get some qualifications, either in art or in music. And this is pretty common, it's very expensive, takes 3 years of your life. Up next, we have a slightly more circuitous route. It's a similar process, I suppose, but it's where you get years of experience doing art school and going into illustration or web dev or something like that, and then jumping across into games sideways. And I think the final route that a lot of people have done recently is start as a mod or a QA tester. Now, these kind of jobs are hard to get, they're hard to find, but once you kind of get your foot in the door, it's much easier to rise up through the ranks. I think one of the most famous examples of this is Soren Johnson, the lead developer, the lead designer on Civilization 4. He actually started as a modder for Civilization 3, and then they employed him and he rose up the ranks. The problem is that all 3 of these options here, they don't actually work for everybody. There's a lot of people who kind of fall through the cracks. Either they don't have 3 years of their life, 4 years of their life to dedicate to a university degree, or they don't simply have the money. Fortunately, for everyone here, there is actually an alternate way of doing this, and there are many ways of doing it. I work for Heart Machine. Heart Machine made Hyperlight Drifter. I managed to get a job with these guys despite not having a degree, despite falling out of my career in theatre, despite falling out of my career as a sound engineer, like Jason over here. But yet I still managed to end up in the games industry. Now this is kind of cool. We'll quickly go through exactly how this worked. I actually found a niche. And I think for all of the budding game designers here and game developers here, finding a niche is the best thing that you can do early on. I did a lot of community building, and I did it in GameMaker. And because I've been using GameMaker for almost, well, it's over half my life now, actually, now I think about it. Because I was really interested in the community side of things, in supporting other GameMaker devs, I was able to put myself into a position where I knew a lot of people, including a physical meetup that I did, that I'm starting, rather, with some GameMaker devs down in London. And kind of being present in this manner meant that I had some peers who knew who I was. I had a network built up, and when Heart Machine were asking around for a programmer for Hyperlight Drifter, the first person that people thought of was me. And that's not because I'm the best programmer in the world, definitely not. But it was because I was visible, because people trusted me, and because I was good enough to meet the needs of the job. I think the greatest thing we can learn from this is that indie games is the Wild West. We're all exploring the fringes of what is possible in games, both from a production standpoint and from actually a mechanical standpoint. There are a lot of options out there. There are a lot of different kinds of games that haven't even been thought of yet, and there are no rules. Unfortunately, much like the Wild West, it's really hard to make money. And I think there are a lot of reasons for this. Ultimately, a lot of time goes into handling all the business stuff, and you don't see or talk about the business stuff a lot. It's not very sexy. You have to deal with lawyers and accountants and doing your finances and paying taxes, all this kind of stuff. And it's a real pain in the ass, to be perfectly honest with you. Freelancing is a great way to supplement some of your income. It's also a great way to use a lot of your time on something that's not your game. But it's something that you have to do. And so when it comes to actually putting the groundwork down for making a game, it takes up a lot of time doing all of this other stuff. And there's also a fundamental problem with indie games. we're unproven. Each one of these games all around you here, they're trying to sell you something interesting, new, unique. Chipload games don't have that problem. They're safe, they're tested, they've got a big-ass marketing budget, which means that any little problems they can kind of smooth over with some better messaging. It's difficult. And fundamentally, I think indies need to approach the entire situation, from top to bottom, with how you're making, selling, producing, designing, marketing, or whatever your game. You need to do something really unique and different to make yourself stand out. Let's have a quick look at some indie developers who have found some success. All of these people are self-published, so they didn't get any money off any publishers. They're all self-sufficient. They're all making multiple games, as in they are on like their second or third or fourth or whatever game. And also they're all using GameMaker as well. You probably never have heard of any of these people, but they're all out there. They're all making it work. Up first, my good friend Sebastian Nigro. He's made a couple of games, and he actually started using GameMaker, started learning when he was at school. He actually told me this kind of weird story. He didn't have the internet when he was growing up. And this was only like 10 years ago. He didn't have the internet, so he printed out the manual so that he could read the manual as like a stack of paper and read through it all, and that's how he learned how to program. He's had absolutely no formal education at all, didn't go to university, and I believe he stopped school at 16 as well, I believe. And he's now in his third game. That means his last two games have been profitable. He's got a partner. He's actually supporting a small family. And the way that he's done that is that he streams an awful lot on Twitch. He creates content to get people engaged with his stuff. And players love this. From the very start to the very finish, they see how a game evolves. This is kind of interesting, it's kind of unique, and not enough people do this. And this is actually at the very core of his business model. He believes that getting involved with the early access communities that he's supporting, he believes that listening to player feedback on subreddits for his game and on Twitter is at the very heart of how he should be running his production. This is kind of interesting, and I don't think enough people really realize that this is important and that it can be done this way. Up next, Charles Webb. He made a game called Ruin of the Reckless. Ruin of the Reckless is an action roguelike, which kind of makes it sound a bit boring. But the way he approached making it interesting is by adding lots of flair on top of it, some magic systems, and with very fast-paced, very difficult combat. And he did it in such a nice way that he managed to get $18,000 out of people despite having never made a game before. And he got to this position, he managed to sell the unique aspects of his game simply because he was passionate about it, because he got engaged with the community very early on. And he's actually used some of the proceeds from Ruin of the Reckless to support his next game as well, so it's definitely a success. The big takeaway from what Charles has done is that he wasn't so much creating content on Twitch, but Charles was passively interacting. He was watching Twitch streams. He was watching people play the game in order to get an authentic opinion on what his game was like for people. You know, when somebody writes a Steam review, there's a bit of a filter there. When you're just watching somebody play, you get a totally different impression of how the game works. He's also very active on social media as well. And he said to me he spent approximately 80% of his time just before release on social media alone. Normally you'd expect, 80% of your time to be spent making the game. Not true. For him, making and supporting, maintaining the community was his best bet for making the best possible game. And he had an interesting interaction with developers as well. So since this was his first game, as I pointed out, since it's his first game, he needed a bunch of people to fill in all the little gaps. And the way he did that is that he asked for help. Development communities are out there to give you some assistance. Use them. You might need to pay people some money, of course, but they're out there and they're going to help you if you ask for it. Up next, and finally, Benjamin Anderson, also known as Heartbeast. He does an awful lot of tutorial creation. If any of you have been involved in GameMaker, you will have heard of Benjamin Anderson. He's enormous. And the way that he makes his games, the way that he's had a community, is that he makes tutorials. And this is, I'd say, half of his job at least. And this earns him a fair amount of money. This supports him. He wouldn't even have to make games if he didn't want to. It's earning him enough money. So this is kind of an interesting way to support yourself as you're going through a difficult development process. His particular interaction with the community is very positive. He is giving to the community. He is forward-facing. He makes sure that he is helping other people before he asks them to consider helping him. He really does spend a lot of time helping other people. He has a Discord community set up to specifically answer questions. This is the kind of active community engagement that I think we all need to be practicing. And as a result of his positive attitude to engage his students, they have an enormous amount of faith in him. He is a very, very talented speaker. He makes his ideas and concepts, he teaches them in a very clear way. And most of all, there's no obligation for any of his students to ever get involved in giving him money. There's no obligation. A lot of them do it anyway, because when he says a game is good, they believe him. So what do all these indies have in common? It's quite simple. They succeeded by building communities. And they started building their communities from the start of production. You can't leave this till the end. No way. And I think this is why we've seen a lot of success with Kickstarter projects. Because when you put something up on Kickstarter, at the start of a project to earn a bit of cash, you already have a community there. They're already invested in your product. You don't have to have a Kickstarter to get people interested from the very start, but it certainly helps. Now, communities do come in all shapes and sizes. It's not just Kickstarter, it's not just Twitter, it's all of these, and probably a whole bunch that I have missed out or that I'm not aware of. And don't forget that physical places like this, physical spaces, are also communities. You can make friends with a lot of people at physical spaces, and they'll remember you because of the nuances of body language and whatever. There's something that I've actually missed off here because even I forgot about it. But don't forget about foreign language communities. English is dominant in the games industry in general. It's great for English-speaking developers. For people in Spain who may not have the same access to English that we take for granted, you need to reach out to those people too. There's a lot of markets, especially in Europe. There's a lot of markets in Europe, in Japan, and in South America, where English is not their preferred language, and you need to reach out to them as well. Not just as a localization for your game, but in a localization for your communities as well, where possible. So you need to find ways to support your communities as an active process. You can't just take them for granted. Every community has their own specific needs and specific requirements. Reddit is infamous for its self-promotion guidelines. It has caught a number of, in fact, every single one of these people has been caught up by subreddit guidelines on self-promotion. So be really careful about not annoying people with promoting yourself. Communities work by everyone being good to each other, by there being a lot of positivity. Try not to let negativity creep into your language, and we'll touch upon toxicity and kind of some of the more unpleasant stuff in a second. But you need to approach every interaction as something that is fundamentally positive. Someone has come to you, they have said something to you, they've made an effort to come and talk to you. And if you can't find the right community, then go and make one. Let's say you're making a game in Unreal, it's a 2D game, it's a roguelike, and it's based around fish. You're making a fish roguelike in Unreal. That's a niche that you can totally make a community for. Go and make it. Go make a subreddit which has a weird name, the Aquatic Adventures or something. And go and make this kind of stuff. There will be loads of people, hundreds of people out there who will be interested in your slightly bizarre niche community. Those are 100 people who will consider giving you money for a game that they're going to enjoy. And I think this is, if you're going to take anything away from this at all, I'm glad you guys have just dropped in. If you're going to take anything away from it, communities are about trust. They need to trust you, you need to trust them. When a player comes to you with some feedback, they're not going to be lying to you. Why would they? They're giving you an opinion on what they think is the right and the wrong way to do things. They may not be correct, but they trust you and you need to trust them that that is honest and authentic feedback. when you're having a hard time making a game, and making games is difficult, as I think a lot of us probably understand, you might need to take a little bit of time off. You might hit a glitch with the networking code. Communicate this to the community. Don't disappear. I know of a strategy game, a turn-based strategy game recently, which hit development hell a couple of months in. And they really, really struggled to communicate what was happening. The lead designer disappeared for a few months, and the whole project really had the bottom taken out of it. I believe it's still going, but because they didn't communicate what was happening, everything fell on its ass. And frankly, always be graceful. It can be hard sometimes. We had some problems with some bugs in Hyperlight Drifter, and it was very frustrating having to deal with these bugs. People are human. They're going to say some things that will annoy you. You don't have to listen to all of their suggestions or act on every problem, but you definitely do need to make them feel like the players are being listened to. And at the end of the day, all of those people who you're talking to, they are all evangelists waiting to happen. People love to talk about what they love. And so if you give them something to love and give them a narrative and some details of why they need to love it, then they're going to keep talking about it, they're going to tell their friends, and you're going to get a bigger community, a bigger player base. This is what we like. And when you do have these people, you do have this large community, hopefully. Give them some encouragement. If you can, send them some free Steam keys. Send them a t-shirt if you've got some t-shirts and they're nearby. Give them some kind of recognition for the hard work that they're putting in on your behalf. It's super important, and it often gets missed. Alongside player communities, there is often kind of a forgotten set of ways of interacting with people. Development communities are here to help you, especially in GameMaker. I can't comment on other engines, I don't know them as well. But in GameMaker, we are very focused on making sure every developer has access to help. I run some of these communities. I know my friends run communities. It's great. But you need to reach out to them and talk to people to make sure that they understand that you're having problems. Being visible is the most important thing in development communities. It's very easy to get lost in the crowd. And if you are visible, then I think you're going to end up getting a lot of jobs. And I certainly get offers of work quite a lot, and that's because of my position as a visible member of the community. I know a lot of my friends who are indie stands here have also found jobs as well, simply by knowing other developers who need a bit of a help. Do get involved in development communities. You don't have to be there 100% of the time, but it is useful, genuinely. And finally, like a little bit of a word on toxicity, because as soon as you have the internet and communities interacting with each other, someone's going to say something, and it's going to be annoying. Somebody's going to get the wrong idea or just deliberately troll. So here's a little bit of a crash course in how to deal with this, because it is going to come up at some point when you guys go out and make communities. I actually asked my interviewees about this as well, deliberately, because I wanted to get their opinions on it. And they gave me this sort of general feedback. You need to be super professional all the time in the public sphere. You need to be super on it. If there are any cracks, people are going to exploit it. They're going to poke at the bits that annoy you most. Making mistakes is okay, though, because we're all human. We're all going to do it eventually. You can recover from this simply by apologizing or hopefully just letting the situation die away. When you do get confronted with some hostility, it is best to deal with it in a private manner. Don't fly off the handle in public. Don't release a quote-unquote tweet storm. Don't insult someone in public on a Discord server. That never goes down well. And whilst they say that all news is good news, it's not true. You can really sabotage your game by having a public outburst. And especially one of the interviewees, I won't say which one, did have a very insulting article written about him in the middle of one of his projects. And the way that he dealt with it is simply to not engage with the negativity. Don't do it. Because as soon as you start adding fuel to that fire, it will get larger and larger and larger, and it risks engulfing the entirety of what you're trying to do. So finally, to close this off, these are some personal comments that the interviewees gave me whilst I was interviewing them. If I had to tell someone how to recreate what I have done, I would tell them that they need to build a community. You have to have a community, otherwise you might as well not be making a game. In the modern era, as an indie dev, I don't really think there's a limit to communities. We are all connected. Thank you. Grand. Does anyone have any questions? I think I saw John running around. John, where's he gone? Okay. Thank you, Jason. You're a star. Yeah, chap in the center there.
What are the challenges in building communities for mobile games as opposed to PC and console games?
Okay. The question was, what are the challenges in building communities for mobile games rather than PC and console? Mobile is a strange space right now, and it kind of always has been since its inception. PC and console is well understood. We have the concept, whether it's right or not, of like a hardcore gamer, and it's quite easy to reach out to those people because they're very much involved on the internet. Mobile gamers are generally not as interested in getting involved with specific internet communities like subreddits, like Discord servers. Some of them will be up on Twitter and Tumblr and this kind of stuff. Ultimately, the best way of getting involved with mobile communities is, well, I mean, there isn't really a best way. It's accessing those people. It's such a broad demographic generally for mobile games. You've really got to think about what your game represents and what its target demographic is, and then finding ways to market directly to those people. As I said, the mobile game audience is extremely large, so it kind of makes more sense to go really narrow with it rather than trying to have a scattershot, mainstream success. For indie games especially, mobile marketing is extremely hard because you need to have quite a lot of money and impetus behind it. In that case, I would talk to producers, I'd talk to publishing companies and see if they can help you out with that. It's okay to ask for help. And I think for mobile games especially, you need some help as an indie developer. Hopefully that answers your question. Anyone else? Yeah, go for the demo. Okay, so the question is, if I heard you right, for a small community, what's the best way to continually keeping them engaged? I think the best way, or a set of best ways, first and foremost, to continually make content. And that's just general advice, but for small communities, it can feel kind of disheartening sometimes when you're kind of putting out lots of information and it's not really getting much traction in like a numerical sense, like it gets 2 likes or whatever. You've got to keep doing it. You've got to keep spreading it wide as you can. And I think one of the main parts of the messaging you need to push is to get people to centralize. So come join the subreddit, come join the Discord server. So you're getting as many people as possible to nucleate around a single point where then you can push stuff directly to them. And hopefully then, since you're talking directly to them, then they'll start telling their friends about how wonderful this person is, how direct and how trustworthy and how active they are. I think from that little single nucleation point, you can snowball up and then grow a little bit larger. I think there's a question over there on your right-hand side.
Hi.
Much louder.
So my question is, what would like to see for getting people from other communities, perhaps even tangentially related, to decide to be part of your community?
I think okay, so the question is, how can you get people from outside of your community to kind of intersect with what you're trying to do? Yeah. I think you've got to look at the specifics of both communities. Try to really understand the community that you're trying to draw people, kind of grab people from. You've got to really understand the detail of why they're there, and then find some intersection with what you're trying to do, and then focus in on the bit right down the middle, on the Venn diagram. You know, these people like, you know, first-person shooters, and they like running around fast, and they like esports and 360 no-scopes. Grand. In your game, you're doing a 2D arcade shooter where you have some esports kind of competitive elements. So instead of focusing on the 2D stuff of look how lovely the pixel art is or whatever, go straight down the middle and be like, we're going to run a Clan Wars style competitive thing, and we're going to push it on Twitter. We're going to Twitch stream it, in that case, stream it on YouTube as well. We're going to try and make some highlight clips of this, of some crazy kills in my game, and really hit that middle point really hard. As I said, I think the core part of this is understanding the nuance and the detail of the other community. You can't just grab people by being general. I don't think in that case you're going to draw people across at all, or it's going to be very limited if you do. Beyond that, I don't think there's a lot you can do if you're trying to steal people away. But yeah, it's just really understanding what those people specifically want. Cool, yeah, and chap down the middle there. Thank you.
And part of it is relevant to what we need. The person asked the question about stealing members from the communities. But I'm more interested in looking for a community that I can put in and also merging different communities together so that they can work together.
Yeah.
How would you approach, say, Microsoft and Sony? One day they want to collaborate on a project and make a single console.
Okay, I think there are two questions there.
There's an Xbox community.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, a quick clarification. When I say steal, I do mean that like not actually stealing, right? I mean that just kind of getting people to share interests. Yeah, and your question is, how do you get communities to merge with each other? Is that right? Yeah. Jason, can you come there? Thank you.
In the same sense that Russia and the United States work together on the NASA and International Space Station.
Yeah.
There are some projects that are too big for Microsoft and too big for Sony alone.
Right. So as an indie developer, trying to get Microsoft and Sony to talk to each other about anything, unless you're Rocket League, it's not going to happen, sadly. However, if you've got a game that is being deployed on both Xbox One and PS4, or future consoles or whatever, then getting those communities to talk to each other requires you to make a very similar experience on both platforms, and to try and cultivate a kind of a game feel on both consoles that is as close to identical as you can get it, so that when the two groups talk to each other on a subreddit or a Discord channel or whatever, then they're speaking the same language. I mean, similar answer to the chat previously, actually, is you've got to look at the similarities there, and you've really got to focus in on them and make the similarities, in this case, as big as possible. If you're trying to get like networked multiplayer between Xbox and PS4, I'd forget it. Neither company, Sony especially, do not want that. However, if you're looking at PC and Xbox, doing networked multiplayer between those two platforms has challenges, obviously, but that can be done. For certain games, you can actually get Windows and Xbox to talk to each other in a technical sense. Hopefully that helps. Any other questions? Yeah, chap at the back there with the glasses. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. They're being really noisy down there. Just say it super loud. What do you say, go on?
If you could only sort of use one platform, sort of one piece of social media to get your word out there, what would you use?
Okay, so the question was, if you could only use one platform to get your game and to start building a community, what platform would you choose? I would choose more than one platform. To be reductive, you can't rely on one thing, because there are all kinds of people out there who need all kinds of things. And your game, unless it's incredibly specific, is not going to speak to everybody in the world. If you just want to get a start, you want to get your foot in the door, to be honest with you, the best thing that you can do to grow a community is to go to physical meetups and talk to people in person. If you have to start anywhere, start there. And then Twitter after that. If you don't go and meet people in person, I think you're missing out on an enormous chunk of what makes games special. And I think you're not going to really understand your player bases perhaps as well as you should be. I mean, just to take an example, there is a game behind, which I won't name. They do a fantastic job at making physical meetups and going to see the booth really exciting. And that is very, very clever. Because every time this particular game comes to EGX, I want to go play the game. Which means that I'm going to tell people about wanting to play the game. Which means that the community grows larger. And it's exactly the right kind of game that needs a huge community. Physical meetups, I think, is the best single way, if you're going to do it one way, to start expanding a community, start expanding your player base. And is there anybody else? Don't be shy. Nope. Cool. Thank you very much to everybody for coming down. Hopefully it's been educational. Some fantastic questions. Thank you for those especially. If you want to chat to me afterwards, I'll be hanging around the indie stuff, or probably down in the corner getting all the wires off of me. Thank you very much for stopping by.